and third-level education for the first time, because previously these had been the prerogative of the rich. A third factor was the rising expectations as a result of the ending of the isolation of Northern Ireland society, with television in particular, opening perspectives of people to other societies. They were no longer living in closed society. They could see that other people in other areas didn't have to put up with what they put up with.
The civil rights marches which followed took their inspiration from the black civil rights movement in America. It was a radical time, the year of the student rising in France and worldwide opposition to the Vietnam War. But their demands were specific and simple: electoral reform, an end to discrimination in jobs and housing, the abolition of the Special Powers Act, and the B specials, whom Catholics knew to be sectarian and partisan.
There was a united force of the people marching together in opposition to the lack of democratic rights in Northern Ireland.
The government had got away for 50 years just blatantly operating the policy of gerrymandering, which was particularly obvious in somewhere like Derry, and they didn't even bother to go to the trouble to hide it. It was quite blatant, and suddenly people said, we've had enough, we're going to protest.
These people had tried all the democratic channels, the lobbying of MPs, and had got nowhere. And therefore, as a last resort, they had opted for public demonstrations.
I wanted to march and protest. I wanted to sit down in the street. I wanted to tell as many people as I could.
But the biggest impetus certainly came from the black civil rights movement, and a feeling among Catholics that if the blacks of America could take on that mighty nation, we could take on a tuppence halfpenny state.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would certainly hope that in conducting this march in our city, that we will act in a responsible manner, demonstrating to the authorities that our intentions are to secure civil rights for the people of our cities and not to cause strife or bloodshed in our city. We are demanding homes, employment, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. We do not wish bloodshed or violence.
The march through the predominantly Catholic city of Derry was not to be allowed through its Protestant centre. The march was poorly marshalled. There was confusion, and the police battened the crowd. This film, transmitted around the world, brought the Northern Ireland question back into the headlines. The civil rights movement had shown that something was sorely wrong in the province.
They made the judgment that there was no possibility of reform through the Northern Ireland system, and that therefore they should go to Westminster, which had overall authority and which, with the Labour government, seemed more open to persuasion. And also that they should try to secure publicity for their aims on the new media which were available, like television, and publicity not just in Northern Ireland or just in the rest of Ireland or Britain, but also internationally to put pressure from outside upon the British.
I think that it would be fair to say that many Protestants in those days supported the call of the cry of the civil rights. But what happened was the civil rights movement was taken over by the Republican element, and then in particular by the IRA, which later became the Provisional IRA. And I think that once the Protestants saw the civil rights being taken over by the Republican element, that any sympathy they may have had for the civil rights was quickly eroded.
Among other demonstrations organised in response to events in Derry, Belfast students, mostly Catholic, were marching from Queen's University to City Hall. Strategically placed along their route was a loyalist counter-demonstration organised by Paisley. The police halted the civil rights march. Paisley's demonstration continued.
We will not have this part of the city desecrated by Republicans. Those that have cursed our flag have cursed our Queen and our art to destroy our country. And I want to say that we are determined as ever to resist the Republicans from Queen's University.
Effectively blocked by the police and Paisley, the students sat down. Disorder like this was becoming a feature of the province's life.
The law in Northern Ireland will be maintained in the interest of all. We cannot and will not allow it to be flouted, nor will we permit others to take it into their own hands. It must now be evident that in the present atmosphere, further civil disorder carries the gravest risks, not for any one section of our population, but for all. No cause other than the cause of anarchy will be served by further riot and commotion in our streets.
O'Neill later made concessions to the civil rights movement. This further disturbed Protestants. O'Neill was becoming isolated. But for Catholics, it was too little, too late.
I want to tell the Ulster Cabinet that this great civil rights cause, which has grown in our country, is going to continue until such times as every town, every village has fundamental civil rights, until houses are allocated on the basis of merit and not on the basis of favour, until such times as every man, irrespective of his creed or his class, will be granted a job, until such time as all the people over the age of 21 will be entitled to vote in every election in our country in a democratic country.
I felt it was just one of these periodical upsurges. It definitely was anti-government. It definitely was anti-British.
They were shouting about the inhumanities that were being done to the Catholics, and something this was happening to the Catholics. The Catholics couldn't get jobs, the Catholics couldn't get houses. But in the same token, I was a Protestant, and I couldn't get these things.
The whole community was reacting, almost as one person, to what we regarded as a very, very serious threat towards our way of life.
They just emphasised Catholic everything. I think that's what happened really to the Protestants as well when they saw this, most of the Protestants. But it was not a movement for civil rights, it was a movement for civil rights for Catholics and nobody else.
Mr. Prime Minister, what was the biggest achievement of tonight's meeting?
No comment.
O'Neill survived another vote of no confidence. The marchers intended to go through Protestant areas. In a country where both Protestant and Catholic are acutely aware of their territory, this was a defiant act. The march was blocked by Paisleyite demonstrators, harassed by Protestant vigilantes and continually rerouted by the police.
we've had some difficulties along the route, and there are certain towns we've been prevented from going through. We don't like that, but we feel that that demonstrates the fact that in Northern Ireland we have a situation like the southern states of America, where you do not have the basic democratic liberty of free procession.
We are not afraid. We are not afraid.
On the fourth day, the march was stopped near Derry. The marchers were told that there were Protestants armed with homemade weapons ahead. District Inspector Hood warned them that they might be stoned, but did not suggest that the march should be rerouted. After some discussion, it was agreed that the police would escort the marchers over Burntollett Bridge.
Police have said they are quite prepared to get us through this obstacle. And if we all keep in very close formation on the right-hand side of the road, the people throwing the stones will be on high ground on the right-hand side. If we keep in close formation on the right-hand side under the hedge, keeping well into the right-hand half of the road, then we should be okay.
The marchers walked into a carefully prepared trap. Loyalists were waiting on the hillside above the road. Many of the attackers were off-duty B Specials, the reserve police force. Police protection had been inadequate.
By the mere fact that they were going marching through loyalist areas, this in itself was provocation, as far as many Protestants saw it. And they reacted, where you had your Burntollett and the waterside fracas and this type of thing. And basically it was because of the fact that the Protestant population feared this Republican threat and feared this Marxist threat. And this is the only way in which they could react against it.
The state was utterly sectarian, and that it was important to demonstrate the depth of the sectarian reality of the state to outside opinion. And that, I think, was the basic strategy behind the Burntollett March, where it was known that the march would meet resistance. But the point was to demonstrate that it was not possible to march from between the two major cities of Northern Ireland without being attacked by loyalist thugs, and to put to the test the state, to put to the test the state's forces.
The march had made its point. Its rapturous welcome by Derry Catholics illustrated how it had further polarised the two communities. The authority of moderates in Northern Ireland was further undermined. That night, the police went into the Bogside, the Catholic district of Derry, and, to quote a government report, were guilty of assault and battery, malicious damage, and the use of provocative, sectarian and political slogans. Northern Ireland was at the point of no return. The 11th of January 1969. This civil rights march was scheduled to pass through the centre of Newry.
Last night, the local committee, on your behalf, made a decision. That decision was that they would not accept any reroute on this march. They would not accept this unjust and tyrannical ban imposed by the discredited Unionist government. It is our view that we cannot go forward and accept any reroutes.
The parade will not be permitted to turn left at this point.
Order! Order!
I would now appeal to you all to be sensible in this matter and to continue a peaceful parade
along the route which has been laid down. The civil rights movement up to now has followed a policy of non-violence. Now, are we going to let down the decent people of this country? No! There are a lot of people who have suffered. Now, is their suffering going to be in vain? Or can we wait for a few more months to get the reforms which must inevitably come?
We'll fight them. One goes on. We'll fight them. Come on! Come on!
As the stewards lost control, Catholic demonstrators were for the first time violent.
But I have also said that if there should arise a crisis in this land, when I would be needed to enter the political arena, I would not fear, but I would go with the support of the Protestant people of Ireland. Solemn declaration to you that if there is an election in the near future in Ulster, whether in prison or out of prison, I'm going to fight O'Neill and back.
Paisley was now emerging as a major Protestant politician. In February 1969, Protestant demonstrators in Belfast were chanting, "O'Neill must go." Then in March and April, there were bomb attacks against water and electricity installations. It was assumed to be the responsibility of the IRA. Actually, they'd been perpetrated by Protestant extremists. However, these incidents raised old fears and anxieties about the IRA. As water was taken from standpipes, O'Neill was blamed for the degenerating situation and the rebirth of the IRA. On the 28th of April, 1969, he resigned.
What is now impossible for me may be, I do not know, easier for someone else. But I have no regrets for 6 years in which I have tried to break the chains of ancient hatred. I have been unable to realize during my period of office all that I had sought to achieve. Whether now it can be achieved in my lifetime, I do not know.
The Unionist Party meets to elect a new leader who would automatically become Prime Minister.
Gentlemen, as Chief Whip of the Unionist Party, and as
There were two candidates, James Chichester Clark, thought to be more moderate than his rival, Brian Faulkner.
Major J.D. Chichester Clark, 17 votes. Mr. Brian Faulkner, 16.
Chichester Clark was related to O'Neill. British politicians at Westminster were following events in the province with increasing concern. Traditional Protestant summer marches were likely to spark off trouble. Chichester Clark would be urged by James Callaghan, Home Secretary and responsible for Northern Ireland, to ban all marches.
Banning these marches, which seem to cause so much trouble in Northern Ireland?
One judges each occasion on its merits and tries to act sensibly and with discretion and responsibility as the situation arises.
The Apprentice Boys' March, celebrating the relief of the siege of Londonderry in 1689, went ahead. To have banned it would have put Chichester Clark's political career in jeopardy. "15,000 Protestants marched that day in a city of only 50,000 people, the majority Catholic. In the Catholic Bogside, barricades were built. Over the past 8 months, the police had twice attacked the area, damaging property as they harassed and taunted the residents. The pomp and strut of the march was met with Catholic jibes. "700 police stood by. During the afternoon, Catholic youth stoned the march as it passed the Bogside. The predictable disorder had begun. To no avail, moderates on both sides tried to defuse the situation.
That's the solution to the problem. Clear them or we'll clear these.
As both sides threw stones, the police stood with their backs to the Protestant rioters.
Move back, please. Move back to the foot. Oh, but I belong to Jerry and I know that, friend. I know that. At the same time, these men here have to keep their backs to you and watch them. You're not helping them. So it appealed to you to go way back.
The police feared that if the Catholics broke out of the Bogside, they would attack Protestant areas. The Catholics were afraid of what the police might do if they got into the Bogside.
It is perfectly obvious that this country, under the present constitution, is ungovernable. You have civilians living in this area who are forced to barricade the place and to launch an almost military offensive on the police force of this country. Not because the people in this area want to break the law, but because they know that if they do not keep the police out of this area, that the police will come in here and ruin their homes and attack their wives and children. Therefore, since the police force are the people who are in fact disturbing the peace, there can be no confidence in the machinery of government.
In the early evening, the police tried to break through the barricades into the Bogside. What had begun as an incident between police and a handful of youths had become a pitched battle. By nightfall, it was stalemate. Petrol bombs from Catholic youths were being answered by CS gas from the police. It was the first time CS gas had been used in the United Kingdom. On the evening of the second day, Chichester Clark went on television.
The irresponsible should know this. The law must and will be maintained. We have already said that we will not shrink from any necessary measure, however firm or however unpalatable. To that end, we are now acting to strengthen the hand of the forces of law and order. We will also use the special constabulary to the full, not for riot or crowd control, but to relieve the regular police of other duties.
The mobilization of the 8,500 B specials inflamed the Catholic population.
Somebody tries to throw that, the top will come out and the petrol will go all over his back. That's why we've had people burned down there. So get the cork in very, very tight, as tight as you can.
The local dairies later reported the loss of 43,000 milk bottles. That afternoon, with the RUC exhausted, Chichester Clark asked for troops to be sent in. In London, the Home Office had already decided their use was inevitable. As night fell, sympathetic rioting broke out across the province.
One prominent Catholic leader at that time, a political leader, who called on the people of Belfast, the Catholic population of Belfast, to come out onto the streets to relieve the people of Derry. Now, basically what he was saying was that the Catholic population of Belfast should come out and create as much mayhem as they possibly could to withdraw, so that the security forces would have to withdraw the RUC to deal with the problem then in Belfast. And once this was stated, then the Protestant population reacted in the only way they possibly could to defend their areas. They went out and attacked the Catholics.
You had the police invading the Ardoyne and Falls Road areas of Belfast, these areas being attacked by B specials and by loyalist paramilitants, a number of people being killed, streets of Catholic houses being burned down. And in that situation, there was a crying demand from the Catholic population for defence, for physical defence.
In Belfast, the police failed to control Protestant mobs, and fierce fighting had broken out along the sectarian divide. 8 people died that night. Whole Catholic streets were gutted. In the morning, Belfast Catholics were filmed abandoning their houses. 1,500 Catholics had lost their homes.
I would say that I don't think actually the IRA went on the offensive, the people went on the offensive. You know, it was the people who had enough at that time. They were brought out into the open. They were brought onto the streets because of the intimidation, the burnings. The people came onto the streets. The IRA were there also, but everybody, literally everybody in a Nationalist or Catholic ghetto, call it what you will, came onto the streets because they knew at some stage their house or their home, they would be affected. And if one grew from the other, or one gave support to the other, then it was inevitable.